Late afternoon light spilled through the bakery's lace curtains. A young woman in a wheelchair sat before a small white cake, candles flickering, untouched. Her gaze fixed on nothing, as if holding her breath for someone who wouldn't come. The doorbell chimed, cold air rushed in. A man in his late 30s stepped inside, his 11-year-old daughter clutching a wrapped box. He smiled gently. "Can we join the party?" "Stay, because sometimes strangers bring the light back." The bakery felt cavernous despite its modest size, the hum of refrigeration units louder than the scattered conversations of afternoon customers. Sweet memories. Bakery had become Eva Lancaster's refuge from a world that had grown increasingly cold and unwelcoming since everything changed 4 years ago. Eva Lancaster, 23 years old, sat in her wheelchair before a small white birthday cake that her nurse had ordered with dutiful efficiency. The cheerful pink frosting and precisely arranged candles felt like a cruel joke. A celebration without anyone to celebrate with. The accident that had paralyzed her from the waist down had stolen more than her mobility. It had taken her father's attention, redirecting his focus entirely toward building his tech empire. Richard Lancaster, powerful CEO and absent parent, had missed another birthday. Board meetings and acquisition deals now took precedence over family obligations. His assistant had sent flowers with a card bearing his printed signature, a gesture that somehow felt worse than nothing at all. The cake sat untouched, 23 candles waiting to be lit in a ritual that had lost all meaning. Eva stared past the flames toward the window where autumn light painted golden patterns across empty tables, each one a reminder of connections she couldn't seem to make. The doorbell's brass chime announced new arrivals, admitting a gust of October air that carried the scent of approaching rain. Daniel Morris stepped inside, brushing sawdust from his work jacket with hands that spoke of honest labor and careful craftsmanship. His late 30s had been kind to him, weathering his features into something approachable and genuine. Behind him followed Sophie, 11 years old with a messy ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. She clutched a small wrapped box against her chest, probably containing some trinket she'd made with the fierce creativity that children bring to gift-giving. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the worn linoleum as she scanned the cozy interior with natural curiosity. Sophie froze mid-step when she spotted Eva sitting alone at her corner table. The sight of the untouched birthday cake and the solitary figure seemed to strike something deep in the child's understanding of fairness and kindness. "Dad," she whispered, tugging at Daniel's sleeve with urgent concern. "She's all alone." Daniel's eyes followed his daughter's gaze, and his expression shifted from casual interest to something deeper. He recognized loneliness when he saw it, had lived with it himself since Sophie's mother died 3 years ago. But their loneliness was shared, softened by each other's presence. This young woman's isolation seemed absolute. He approached slowly, his movement deliberate and non-threatening. Crouching slightly to meet Eva's eyes at her level, he offered a smile that carried no pity, only genuine warmth and human connection. "Mind if we join your party?" he asked, his voice carefully modulated to convey kindness without presumption. Eva hesitated for a heartbeat, her default response shaped by years of people treating her as either fragile or invisible. Something in Daniel's manner suggested he saw neither weakness nor charity case, just another person who might enjoy some company on what was clearly meant to be a special day. She nodded faintly, the gesture barely perceptible but unmistakably welcoming. Sophie immediately claimed the chair beside Eva, as if they'd been friends forever, her natural lack of self-consciousness cutting through adult awkwardness like sunlight through clouds. The air in the small bakery shifted perceptibly, the oppressive weight of solitude beginning to lift as 3 strangers found themselves connected by nothing more complicated than shared humanity and perfect timing. Sophie began talking before she'd even settled completely into her chair, words tumbling out with the unstoppable enthusiasm that children bring to new friendships. She launched into an animated account of her disastrous attempt at baking cookies the previous week, burnt edges, flour explosions, and smoke alarms that brought concerned neighbors to their door. Eva found herself laughing, the sound short and surprised, as if it had been locked away so long she'd forgotten how it felt. The laugh seemed to surprise Sophie too, who grinned with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully shared joy with a stranger. Daniel mostly listened, content to watch both girls discover each other. His carpenter's hands wrapped around a coffee cup the bakery owner had quietly delivered, and he observed the interaction with the careful attention of someone who understood that small moments could reshape entire lives. "I used to paint," Eva admitted during a lull in Sophie's chatter, her voice carrying the weight of abandoned dreams. "I was actually pretty good at it, but after the accident," she trailed off, unwilling to voice what they could all understand. That tragedy had stolen the joy from her hands along with everything else. Daniel's expression softened with recognition. "Sophie's mom died when she was 8, he shared, his words simple but heavy with shared understanding. "We're still figuring out how to live with the pieces that got broken, but we're doing it together." The confession hung in the air between them, not uncomfortable but honest in the way that grief recognizes grief across all boundaries. Sophie reached across the small table, her small hand covering Eva's, with the unconscious kindness that children possess before the world teaches them to hesitate. "You could paint again," she said with absolute certainty. "I bet you'd be really good. I'd like to see your painting sometime." The simple statement carried more healing power than months of therapy had managed to achieve. Eva felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of despair that had taken residence there. Daniel retrieved a lighter from his jacket pocket and carefully lit Eva's birthday candles, each small flame adding warmth to the gathering dusk outside. "Make a wish," he told her, his voice gentle but encouraging. Sophie began counting the candles with theatrical precision. 1, 2, 3, 4, her voice rising with excitement as the number climbed. For the first time in years, Eva closed her eyes not to escape reality, but to embrace possibility. Behind her eyelids, she saw colors, rich blues and warm yellows, the kind of hues that had once flowed from her brushes with confident strokes. She made a wish that felt dangerous in its hopefulness. They shared the cake together, the vanilla sweetness somehow enhanced by the unexpected company. Each bite felt like a small celebration, not just of Eva's birthday, but of the mysterious alchemy that transforms strangers into something approaching family. The bakery owner glanced over periodically, her smile growing wider each time she witnessed the unlikely trio finding joy in their impromptu gathering. Other customers came and went, but the three at the corner table seemed to exist in their own bubble of discovered connection. The afternoon slipped away unnoticed, measured not in minutes, but in shared stories and comfortable silences. When Daniel finally glanced at his watch, surprised by how much time had passed, none of them wanted the spell to break. If you've ever witnessed a single afternoon reshape someone's understanding of what's possible, you'll want to know what happened next. 1 week later, Eva sat at the same corner table in Sweet Memories Bakery, but everything felt different now. A sketch pad lay open before her, the first drawings she'd attempted in 4 years, taking tentative shape under her careful pencil strokes. Beside her, Sophie worked with intense concentration on a coloring book, her tongue poking out slightly as she navigated complex color choices. Daniel sat across from them, nursing his second cup of coffee and watching both girls with quiet contentment. His carpenter's schedule allowed for these afternoon breaks, and he'd found himself looking forward to them with an anticipation that surprised him. Sophie had been brighter, more animated since meeting Eva, as if having someone else to care for had awakened something nurturing in the child's spirit. The peaceful scene shattered when the bakery door swung open with unnecessary force, admitting Richard Lancaster and his ever-present assistant. His presence filled the small space like a cold front, his expensive suit and commanding bearing at odds with the bakery's homey atmosphere. His eyes swept the room with corporate efficiency before fixing on his daughter with an expression that mixed surprise and disapproval. "Ava," he said, his voice cutting through the afternoon's gentle ambiance like a blade, "we need to leave. Now." The warmth drained from the corner table as if someone had opened windows in winter. Sophie's coloring pencil froze mid-stroke, and Daniel straightened in his chair, recognizing a threat when he saw one. Richard's gaze shifted to Daniel with obvious disdain, taking in the work clothes and calloused hands with the automatic dismissal that money teaches its possessors. "You don't belong in her life," he stated with the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to having his pronouncements become reality. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady when he replied, "Maybe her life is bigger than you think it is." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Richard's expression hardened. He leaned closer to Eva, his voice dropping to a tone that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Stop seeing them," he commanded, loud enough for Daniel and Sophie to hear clearly. "Or I'll make sure his little carpentry business becomes a memory. I have that kind of influence, and we both know it." Eva's hands trembled against her sketchpad, the pencil rolling forgotten across the table. She'd witnessed her father destroy business competitors and personal obstacles with the same casual efficiency he applied to board meetings. The threat wasn't empty posturing. It was a promise backed by unlimited resources and ruthless determination. That evening, Eva sent a text message that felt like tearing out a piece of her own heart. "I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me." She stared at the screen for 20 minutes before hitting send, then turned off her phone to avoid seeing Daniel's response. Daniel read the message in his workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects that suddenly seemed pointless. He understood immediately what had happened, had seen the cold calculation in Richard Lancaster's eyes, and knew exactly how the conversation had unfolded. Sophie found him there an hour later, still staring at his phone. "Is it because we're not rich enough?" she asked with the devastating directness that children bring to painful truths. Daniel's silence was answer enough. They sat together in the sawdust-scented workshop, both mourning the loss of light that Eva had brought into their lives, while across town, Eva sat alone in her father's penthouse, staring at canvases that would remain forever blank. 4 days of silence stretched like weeks, each one heavier than the last. Daniel found himself driving past the Lancaster estate twice, never stopping but unable to stay away entirely. Sophie had grown quiet, her coloring books abandoned as she stared out windows with the patient sadness that children wear when adults fail them. On the fourth morning, Sophie made a decision with the fierce clarity that comes before doubt has time to interfere. "We have to see her," she announced over breakfast, her small jaw set with determination that reminded Daniel painfully of her mother. "She needs to know we didn't choose to leave." Daniel drove to the Lancaster mansion with growing uncertainty, but Sophie's conviction carried them through the ornate gates and up the circular driveway. Security guards blocked their path with professional politeness, but Sophie pressed her face against the iron bars and called out with desperate hope, "Miss Eva, we miss you. We didn't want to leave." Inside the mansion, Eva heard the voice through thick windows and felt her carefully constructed resolve crumble like paper in rain. She'd spent 4 days trying to convince herself that isolation was better than putting Daniel and Sophie at risk, but hearing Sophie's voice made the choice suddenly clear. She wheeled herself through hallways that felt more like a museum than a home, past artwork worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, toward the kitchen where Maria, the longtime cook, waited with knowing eyes. Without a word, Maria opened the back door and stepped aside, understanding that some choices transcended employer loyalty. Rain had begun falling as Eva made her way through streets she hadn't navigated alone in years, her wheelchair's motor humming through puddles while determination overcame every practical obstacle. By the time she reached Sweet Memories Bakery, she was soaked and shivering, but more alive than she'd felt since the accident. Inside, Daniel and Sophie sat at their usual table, both staring at empty plates with the hollow expressions of people processing loss. They looked up as Eva entered, dripping rainwater and breathing hard from exertion and emotion. "I'm choosing," she said through tears that mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "I choose you. I choose us. I choose having a family that actually shows up." The bakery door burst open again, and Richard Lancaster stood there, drenched and furious, his expensive suit dark with rain and his usual composure completely shattered. He'd followed security footage and frantic assistant reports to find his daughter in the last place he'd expected. But before he could speak, Sophie stepped between Eva's wheelchair and her father's anger, her small body radiating protective fury that seemed to fill the entire space. "You're her dad, but you're mean to her," she declared with devastating honesty. "My dad says family means being there when it matters, not just when it's convenient." Richard's eyes shifted to his daughter, really seeing her, perhaps for the first time in years. Eva's voice shook as she spoke, but her words carried absolute conviction. "I don't need your money anymore, Dad. I need a family that chooses to love me." Something fundamental broke inside Richard's carefully constructed armor. He sat heavily in an empty chair, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "I want to try," he said quietly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I want to learn how to be your father again." 1 year later, the same bakery bloomed with white flowers and soft ribbons. Eva wore her mother's dress, altered to accommodate her wheelchair, while Daniel stood beside her in a suit that Sophie had helped him choose. Richard walked beside Eva's chair, tears streaming down his face as he prepared to give away the daughter he'd finally learned to cherish. Because family isn't always the one you're born into. It's the one you choose to build, one small kindness at a time. Subscribe to our heart stories for more tales that remind you what really matters.